Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's presentation of how to get started with AWS. My name is Robert Payne. I oversee marketing here at Cloud Nexa, and I'll be your moderator for today's broadcast. Just a couple house cleaning notes before we get started. First and foremost, happy Veterans Day. Thanks to those attending this webinar on a national holiday, and thanks to all of the veterans for their service. We are recording today's presentation, and you will receive a copy of the recording afterwards via email. And we will have a Q&A session at the conclusion of the presentation. So if you have questions, standard procedure, just type them into the GoToWebinar questions box, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So as you can see here on the left-hand side, these are the topics that we're going to cover in today's broadcast. We'll start with the basics and how to get started with cloud. We know it's a hot button issue for a lot of people. We'll look at how AWS cloud services are priced, some use cases, and the areas a lot of people target when they get started with cloud. And then we'll run you through the AWS 101 crash course and finally discuss how Cloud Nexa, a premier consulting partner and MSP partner with AWS, can help you in this transition. Now I'd like to introduce our panel for today's webinar. So first we have Sarah Doyle, sales engineer here at Cloud Nexa.
Hello, how's everyone doing today?
And then we have Lisa Swanson. And Lisa, you're basically the go-to for all things AWS and public sector, if you're on the West Coast. Is that right?
Hi, Robert. Thanks. I am one of the team members for all things go-to, and super excited to be supporting our public sector customers.
Great. And finally, we have Atul Ganatra, solutions architect at AWS.
Hello, everybody. I'm a solution architect supporting public sector customers with AWS, so happy to be here.
Great. And with that, we'll get started. So you see here we have the tagline, cloud is the new normal. This was the famous phrase that came out of Andy Jassie's keynote at reInvent last year. And it's not really in dispute anymore, so we don't need to spend a ton of time here. Just note the continuing industry trends of the shift towards cloud. Most notably, you see on the bottom right-hand corner, close to half of the organizations that were surveyed are looking to increase spending on cloud computing. And that correlated with a quarter saying that they were also going to decrease hardware spending, which is kind of what you would expect as you shift towards the cloud. So everyone knows, or at least is bombarded with claims that the cloud is cheap or cost-effective, but sometimes you need more detail than that to translate into a business case. So we wanted to take a look at kind of the costing and the pricing. It's typically bucketed into the four areas you see on the screen here. The first of which is transferring costs from capital expense to operational expense, or CapEx to OpEx, as it's known, with the latter typically being easier to get approved because it doesn't involve an initial huge outlay of funding. You hear a lot about how economies of scale deliver cost savings, and that's acutely true with Amazon. Historically, they've always funneled profits back into the business, and this dates back to even before AWS, and that philosophy is being retained here, the strategy being to retain the customer, attract new ones with value-added services, and by constantly improving the product and the service versus lining your pockets. And again, we're seeing that strategy employed here with AWS. And as we see with numbers 3 and 4, it's really all about saying goodbye to having to forecast or guess about how much capacity you're going to need down the road, which can lead to either being underprepared or wasting resources. The AWS on-demand model allows you to spin up these resources whenever you need them, turn them off when you don't. And if you do have a decent handle on the compute and storage requirements, you can take advantage of something called reserve instances, in which you sign up for a certain amount and receive even better pricing for that. On the next two slides, we're going to discuss the most common areas people target to get started with cloud, and the common use cases that are driving adoption both now and in the future. So, where to begin? Obviously, a lot of folks on the call today are sitting here with a huge, on-prem technology stack, and they're kind of wondering, what do I move first to the cloud? And you just see here some of the areas that we have listed. If you have a poor performing web or business application, that's a good candidate to move it to the cloud. Storage, backup, and disaster recovery is a huge area that we're seeing, especially in the the government, education, and nonprofit sector as storage requirements increase, as well as the importance of being able to recover and keep data secure. If you're trying something new, like VDI, Amazon has Workspaces, which is a great candidate for that. Any type of hosted application, and things coming to their end of their natural life. And just again here, talking about some of the main use cases, just so everyone can see what other companies are bucketing to go into cloud. We just touched on backup and recovery and websites. Here at Cloud Next, we work with a client that has an app that is using the new infrastructure or Internet of Things service from Amazon and sending sensor data from cities back to a central location. So they're tracking traffic patterns, crime. All this data has to go somewhere. So AWS is a great place to put it. Cool, Sarah, anything to add as far as use cases go?
Yeah, so we definitely see a lot of, DR and backup and recovery as a pretty heavy use case on AWS, especially within the public sector and their requirements for retention and having a certain DR plan in effect. So that's definitely one of the top use cases that we see.
Thanks. Okay, so now we'd like to transition into kind of the Amazon Web Services 101 crash course here, and for that I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Doyle.
Sure, thank you so much. All right, so when we talk about AWS, I mean it's a cloud vendor, but let's really focus on what sets AWS apart from the other providers. So the first thing is the experience, obviously. AWS has been around since 2006, and since 2006 they have offered more and more services year over year and groundbreaking innovations that come from the experience and skills that they have in this field. Their rapid pace of innovation is, unmatched by anybody in the industry. Their expansion on a global footprint is pretty impressive. I mean, once we get into the slide that talks about the different AWS regions and locations, you'll be able to see that the amount of growth that AWS is experiencing right now is pretty tremendous. And also their pricing philosophy. So the more you use, the less you pay. It's all utility-based, so you're only going to be paying for what you're using. As Robert mentioned, you're not going to have to forecast and plan a budget for what you're anticipating you're going to be spending. You're just going to spend for what you use. And then there's also the ecosystem. So it's the partner ecosystem and support system that they have behind them. So as you can see here, talking about rapid pace of innovation, since 2011, the amount of innovations that have been released is pretty tremendous. I mean, in 2014, they had 516 new innovations. So as you start expanding your own footprint on AWS, the number of services that are going to be offered for your use case are just going to grow, and you're going to be able to have more efficiencies on AWS, performance enhancements, all while also lowering your cost. So this is just a quick snapshot of the history of the innovation. So as you can see in 2006, to the left of the slide, AWS started out with just some simple services, S3 for their storage, SQS, which is the simple queuing service, as well as the EC2 service, which is Elastic Cloud Compute. And since 2006, the amount of growth that AWS has experienced with these innovations to really streamline and make your usage on AWS as efficient as possible. For example, releasing CloudFront, so having a content delivery service for your website, so you're only located in one particular region, but yet you can publish your content with low latency to users across the world. And then introducing, say, AWS Storage Gateway. So this is making it very easy for customers to quickly back up their infrastructure or have some sort of warm standby in AWS from a DR's perspective. So the amount of innovations that have come to this date and then are looking in the future are very impressive. And what drives a lot of the innovation is their customer feedback. So what AWS takes, very seriously is what their customers are doing on AWS and what they plan on doing and what's going to make their experience that much better. So the Gartner Magic Quadrant for 2015 was published in May, and I mean AWS is just a clear market leader. So you can see they're at the top of the chart there. I think what's most impressive and impactful about this slide is the quote that says, AWS has more than 10 times the compute capacity than the total aggregate of all of the other vendors, of all the other 14 providers. So, I mean, when you're looking to go to a cloud, AWS is definitely the clear market leader for a reason. Now more about the pricing philosophy, which is also something that's pretty much unmatched in the market today. Is they're working on the philosophy that the more customers consume AWS, that's what's driving down the price. So as AWS continues to grow, which is apparent and obvious from all the innovations that they've had and how they're expanding their global footprint, this is going to totally overall lower your infrastructure cost. And they pass that cost savings on to their customers as well. So here's a map of the world, and it's showing the global footprint. So what they're defining here is an active customer. They define an active customer as a non-AWS customer who has an account usage activity within the past month. So there's regions, and then there's edge locations. The region is the actual location of the data centers or the cluster of data centers for their AWS customers. The edge locations are where the CloudFront distributions have their content cached. So for example, if you're in the East Coast in the United States and you need to reach an end user that is on the West Coast of the United States, you have multiple edge locations in order to deliver that content with a very low latency. So they have, I think it's about 190 countries right now that have expanded their footprint over. And the scale and capacity matter. So every day they're adding more and more server capacity to their global infrastructure. And speaking of the services that they offer, I mean, it's pretty much going to cover every use case that a customer can possibly think of. So they've developed one of the broadest collections of services available from any cloud provider. They approach to having regions and availability zones to offer high availability and low latency for your applications. They offer the capability to both manage and unmanaged database options. So for example, if you have a SQL Server database that you just want to focus on managing the content of your database and focusing on the SQL Server instance itself rather than the underlying operating system, RDS is a great platform to examine because that's a fully managed database service. They also have offerings for analytics and application services that will enable advanced data processing for very large workloads. They have AWS Redshift, which is their cloud-based data warehouse. It's pretty much the fastest growing service in AWS history. Then they have management tools. They have partners to help you manage all of these services, like ourselves, Cloud Nexa. So really, they are giving you the tool set, and they're also providing the support system to back it.
Yeah, the service breadth and depth here, I mean, it's great, but it's also going to be a little intimidating. So we're going to talk a little bit later about how to leverage the partner network to kind of understand which of these services and features are right, because not everyone is going to apply to every entity, and kind of surfing through them and finding the ones that are most applicable is part of the way to optimize the deployment and the cloud itself.
So this is just also another example of the previous slide. It's just showing the different stacks and the AWS global infrastructure, the different foundation services, and you have your application tier and deployment and management. So it's not just the fact that they have all these services. It definitely goes a lot deeper than that, because examining each service individually is really driving the fact that you're not just going to be leveraging compute capacity in the cloud. you're going to be leveraging much, much more. And AWS is offering a complete tool set for all of your infrastructure needs for pretty much any use case or any application that you have on the cloud, whether it be under compute, so it's going to fine-tune what's the use case, what does your application actually require? Do you need just a general purpose compute capacity, or do you need something that's more RAM optimized? So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of services that are going to help you optimize that application. Your storage, what's your use case? Do you need provision IOPS? Do you need something that's a little more low latency like magnetic volumes? There's the elastic file system now that's been introduced, so this is going to allow you to have a shared storage concept. When moving on to databases, they have support for MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres. They have their own actual database offering with Aurora. And what's nice about all these offerings, especially when you're looking at RDS, which is the Relational Database Service, which is a fully managed database service, you're going to have the concept of multiple availability zones. And as we get into the next slide, I'll explain further what that means. So the next slide is going to show here an example of an AWS region. So what this slide is pointing out is the US East region, which is located in Virginia. And this box right here on the left-hand side is showing that this is one single region, but as you can see, there's 5 different what they call availability zones. Each availability zone is essentially an independent cluster of data centers. So as we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see that one single availability zone has multiple data centers in a cluster. Each availability zone is an independent cluster of data centers. So when we're looking at RDS, for example, you're going to leverage multiple availability zones or multi-AZ. So this means that you're going to have both a primary and a secondary database in different availability zones. So we're going to see the one availability zone, we'll call it A, and availability zone B. You're going to have your primary and availability zone A, your secondary and availability zone B, and you'll have automated failover. So if anything were to happen to anything in that data center, the RDS service will actually automatically fail over and promote your secondary database to the primary until the issue can be resolved. So this is creating complete high availability and essentially zero downtime for any of your end users. So here's an example of one of the clusters of data centers. I mean, it's typically more than 50,000 servers, more closer to probably 80,000. So I mean, the compute capacity and the hardware that's actually backing these data centers is tremendous. AWS has a custom network equipment, so as you can see, it's listed below, the multi-ODM source, Amazon custom network protocol stack. So it's all very sophisticated and just in a single cluster of data centers, all of this is powering it. So let's talk about the shared responsibility model with AWS. So AWS will pretty much take care of the infrastructure from the hardware standpoint. So they're going to take care of the security for the underlying infrastructure. That's going to include physical security across their regions and data centers, all of the availability zones and edge locations. They're responsible for the security of the foundation services that underpin the AWS environment. But then the customer needs to take responsibility that you're architecting your application properly and following the best practices that AWS is providing for you. So you're going to be, in charge of making sure that your data is encrypted, that your networking is configured properly with the proper public and private subnets. And this can be a lot to manage, and it can be a lot to wrap your head around. But that's really where a partner like Cloud Nexa comes into play, and this really kind of transitions into our next slide nicely. So now to talk a little bit about who is Cloud Nexa. So we are a premier consulting partner, and that means that we have a premier partnership status with AWS that is something that's earned through AWS. It's earned through customer feedback, number of certifications for our engineering team. It's not something that's very taken lightly. We've earned this status for 2014, 2015, and 2016. Now, who are we and where do we come from? So we've been a partner with AWS since almost the beginning. In 2008, we were one of their very first partners. In 2010, we became an AWS reseller, and then in 2014, we gained the premier status. So we have a lot of competencies on AWS as a managed service provider. We have some focus on SharePoint and Exchange. We have a lot of AWS product team participation. So what that means is, our staff, our engineering staff actually sits on the roadmap discussions with the AWS product teams to understand their roadmap and what they're trying to do with the new products and services that they're releasing. So why choose Cloud Nexa? So, I mean, we've been around for a very long time. I think that, since this slide has been updated, we have probably about 3 million AWS hours, managed hours per month on AWS. We're experienced. Obviously, we've been a partner since 2008. We also follow very closely the pricing model on AWS. So we are also a utility-based pricing model that we also offer services for any customer that's spending under $2,000 a month on AWS. We'll actually waive our managed services fee until you start to get more comfortable and grow over the $2,000 a month mark. We also have a very powerful tool set called the VNOC Management Platform, and what this tool set is used for is really to complement and enhance the existing functionality within the AWS console. So what are some of the problems that we solve? Well, here's some excerpts from some of our customers. These testimonials are also available on our website. We're just constantly working on, Robert is constantly working on developing use cases and getting more of our customer feedback put on our website. So what are the problems that we solve? Well, customers come to us because they need help. AWS is a very complex offering from a cloud perspective, and customers come to us because they need the help. We have the knowledge. We're going to help them adopt the AWS infrastructure quicker, more efficiently, following best practices. We understand compliance requirements from a breadth of different compliances. So do you need to be in GovCloud? Do you have PCI compliance? Do you have HIPAA? We're very familiar with all of those use cases. And we basically become your SysOps team. So we're going to be the sysadmins of your AWS infrastructure from a managed services perspective. We offer cost management and 24/7 support from our engineering team. And what sets us apart from the other vendors and the other partners in the ecosystem is that we do have the utility-based pricing model. So our charge is simply 18% of whatever your AWS monthly spend is. So as your spend increases, you'll see that reflected in the 18%. But then every time AWS lowers their price, which they do notoriously probably almost about 4 times a year, you'll see that drop on our end as well.
Yeah, the main thing with utility pricing is, like I was saying before, everybody gets bombarded with messages about how cheap the cloud is, and to a certain extent, it's very true, right? It allows you to consume things just like you would consume any other utility, but the problem is it's so new that the knowledge level of everyone that needs to use it isn't necessarily where it needs to be, so that's where partners come in. Everybody, that makes sense, but a lot of times the partners will then charge hefty professional service fees to kind of get people into the cloud. At Cloud Nexa, we're different. So we don't charge any upfront fees, or we don't lock anybody into any contracts. We simply, like Sarah was saying, charge a percentage of spend of your AWS spend. So if you think about it, that really makes us incentivized to get folks to cloud as quickly and efficiently as possible.
All right, so moving to the next slide, we have, this is just a quick table that's showing what our offering includes. So we have a few different tiers of service here. The first to the left, as you see, we have a free tier, and the free tier is just giving you almost like a trial. You can continue to use it forever, but it's the free tier of our VNOC management platform. It has some limited functionality that's available. We have a UI for CloudTrail and CloudWatch. We offer the capability to archive CloudWatch metrics, which is the monitoring tool through AWS. We have a URL monitor as well as the AWS config UI. Then there's a self-service model. So self-service simply means that you get access to our tool set, the VNOC management platform, and we become the reseller of record. There's really no cost associated with this. You just you get the VNOC management platform, which I'll get a little bit more into, and we're the reseller. And then there's the managed services, which is our core competency. We provide 24/7 support and monitoring of the infrastructure. We will build out infrastructure. We do account reviews on a periodic basis that we look for areas of efficiency or ways that we can help you lower your monthly spend. And that's 18% once you're over $2,000 a month. And then we have the premium tier. And the premium tier is an offering that we have partnered with 3 other additional vendors. There's Trend Micro and their Deep Security as a Service, Sumo Logic, which is a log aggregation and management tool, and AppDynamics for application performance monitoring. So the premium tier can be consumed as a complete bundle with all of the vendors, or you can do an a la carte offering, based on what your requirements are. And now there's the VNOC management platform. So again, this is a tool that we developed in-house in order to, have more ease of use around managing our customer environments. But we also extend this offering to our customers. And it's really just creating a nice complement to the existing functionality within the AWS console itself. There's billing reports and resource management. There's ways to provide governance, so you can automate backup policies and customize retention policies. You can have a lifecycle management tool which will allow you to really control cost for certain development cycles that you need to go through. So if you're not running your development 24/7, we're not going to help you control cost by powering on and powering off those instances to really help you save some money.
Yeah, the VNOC management platform is really what we developed in-house to help us do managed services, right? So we had all these clients that we were managing AWS deployments for, and we found the console didn't serve our needs, so we developed VNOC, which sits on top of the console. And basically what we've tried to do with this piece of software is build automation and best practices that people can deploy from a self-service standpoint. So there's going to be a lot of customers, especially early ones, that come to us and want us to manage the environment, and that's fine. We have the capability and the expertise to do so. But then there's going to be other customers that say, look, I don't necessarily need full managed services, but I would like a platform that would help me build automation and build out best practices for AWS automatically, and that's what the VNOC platform does.
All right, so now just a quick look into what a typical engagement looks like with Cloud Nexa. So obviously we'll start off with the initial call. So if you're interested in our services, we will set up some time to speak with one of our sales representatives. We will get a high-level overview of what your use case is. We will, once you're comfortable with moving forward, we'll introduce you to our engineering team. We'll put together an architecture review, and we'll examine your requirements to ensure that we are capturing all of your requirements and translating that into the proper AWS infrastructure. We'll have a high-level architecture document delivered so that you can see what your environment is going to look like on AWS. We'll actually build out the infrastructure. We have migration services that can be provided for an additional cost, or you can actually just deploy your application and copy your data yourself. And then in an ongoing engagement, we'll actually manage everything for you from the operating system layer down. We'll do patch management at the OS level. We have 24/7 support and monitoring. So we have more of a proactive engagement so that we're continually looking at your environment and making sure that it's performing efficiently.
Okay, thanks so much, Sarah, Atul, and Lisa. So we're going to get into the Q&A portion of the session, but first I just wanted to show everybody how they can kind of follow up with us and what the next steps would be. You can, of course, visit aws.amazon.com. There's a sign-up button right in the top right-hand corner. It's very easy to get started. Simply hook up your credit card and you can go from there. You can also visit cloudnexa.com if you're interested in our managed services or the VNOC management platform. If you want to contact any one of us, feel free to do so. We will be following up with you via email, and I'll leave this slide up for the duration of the Q&A so that you can jot each one of these emails down if you need to. Follow us on Twitter, and then lastly, as kind of a takeaway from this presentation, we're giving away our Insider's Guide to Deploying and Managing AWS. This is a white paper we've written. We had our experts write in-house, and it essentially goes through the challenges, the pitfalls, and the risks associated with transitioning to the cloud. What are the questions you need to be asking? What are the problem areas that you need to be looking out for? and what are some of the best practices that you need to be leveraging. So everyone will get a copy of that in the follow-up email. And now we'll go on to some questions. Just bring up the question marks real quick. Okay, so as a government entity, we have a different purchase process than traditional businesses. Can you walk us through how you support that specific purchasing process? So I'll throw these out to Lisa, Sarah, Atul, anyone that wants to jump on them can certainly do so.
This is Lisa. I can certainly answer that question. So government entities oftentimes have a challenge with logging on and agreeing to click-through terms. Their procurement department might have rules against that, or perhaps there's rules against using a credit card for utility services. There's a variety of different options that are available for government entities. One option is we can set up invoicing very simply so that you don't have to use a credit card. You just contact your AWS representative or Cloud Nexa to get you started on that. Another option, if the click-through agreement is the barrier, there's a number of cooperative purchasing agreements from GSA to WISCA to PEPM to U.S. communities that we can get you involved with as well to address those issues.
Yeah, to add to that too, Cloud Nexa has a GSA schedule available to work with government agencies that require purchasing off of that.
Great, thank you. Next question. So we have someone from a university that is very decentralized. So they say if I give everyone access, meaning different departments and what have you, to create and deploy AWS instances, things might get out of control from like a cost as well as resource consumption perspective. How can they manage that or kind of guard against that happening?
So I can take that. So the best way to really manage cost control and who can do what within the AWS ecosystem is, or the infrastructure, is by leveraging IAM roles. So especially from a Cloud Nexa standpoint, whenever we engage with a customer, we always like to make sure that we have a single point of contact that we're working with who can manage the approval process for spinning up new infrastructure, approving out certain builds. The VNOC management platform will allow you to really create visibility into all areas of where you're spending money and how you're spending money. So between role-based access and the VNOC management platform, it's pretty easy to try to lock down, control over spend.
And one quick thing I'd like to add, Sarah, is with the IAM, we have great granularity of the access you can provision for different users. So, for example, everything we do within the AWS platform is actually an API call. So a lot of times, people know of AWS as things you do in the console, but in reality, when you deploy things in a production, you are going to be using CLIs and command line interface and API calls to manage those resources. And we have ability to create policies that can be attached to those roles so that you can very granularly control which API calls can be made against which resource. So you can say, this particular group of users is allowed to control this to EC2 instances in development environment, and by the way, they can only start and stop the instance, and they cannot really change anything. So you can get really granular and control exactly everything you need.
Great, thank you. So the next one is, I can at least take the first part of this, and maybe Lisa or Atul, you can speak to it from the Amazon perspective. But budgets are always tight. Money's hard to come by. I can't necessarily afford to pay for expensive consulting as it relates to cloud, but I obviously need some guidance to get things set up. So again, just going back to what I was saying before, the Cloud Nexa model is different. It's very unique. We haven't found any other companies in the ecosystem that have been able to replicate it. Again, we don't charge any upfront fees. We don't lock anybody into contracts. We literally take a percentage of spend as our fees, which means two things. One, we're incentivized to get you to the cloud quickly and effectively, and two, we have to earn your business on an ongoing basis. So if you're not happy with the services that we're providing, you can leave at any time. So we constantly have to do our best to retain you as a customer.
That is true, Robert. I'd like to add that we have great content that we work very hard to put out for public consumption. So there are many channels that our customers go to in addition to actually getting help from people like myself. We are solution architecture team. We help customers as part of the sales team and help identify opportunity, at the same time help implement the AWS solutions the right way and make sure that customers are following the best practices and taking the advantage of the platform to the optimum level, and cost savings and all those things that we typically help our customers with. But we do have a lot of white papers that we publish regularly on various topics. We have a lot of channels on YouTube, for example, that we regularly put great content, and our customers find a lot of value in using those to get started and continue to explore the services.
Yeah, that's a great point, Atul. Like AWS best practices are pretty widely published. It's not like it's a secret that we keep.
Oh yeah.
But it's widely published. Like you said, there's a lot of channels, there's white papers, YouTube videos, anything. Just go to Google and start searching, or go to aws.amazon.com, start searching. That's why it's funny when we see other companies in the ecosystem charging for the knowledge when it's really widely available. It's interesting.
Yeah, in fact, one great example of is that we recently had our reInvent content, and almost all the sessions from that conference are published on YouTube for free consumption. So.
Yep, as will this webinar afterwards. We have someone that who says the higher ups at their organization have data security concerns as it relates to the cloud, so they're asking if we could speak to that topic.
Sure, I'll take that one. So with data security, I mean, there's ways that you can be architected properly and securely on AWS. You just need to know what the best practices are, which is where a partner like Cloud Nexa can really help with that. Between the native capability that's available with AWS in order to securely architect, there is also a wide variety of tool sets that are available. One of them being Trend Micro, who we partner with for deep security as a service, that you can leverage. So there's third-party tools, there's the native capabilities. AWS wouldn't be the market leader that they are if there was a tremendous amount of security concerns surrounding that.
Yeah, and I'd like to add a little bit to what we touched upon earlier about shared responsibility model. So if you look at it, it sounds like AWS is responsible for certain portion of the stack, and the customer is responsible for the rest of the things you build on the AWS cloud. What really that means is that AWS takes care of securing a lot of the infrastructure that a customer would be responsible to secure otherwise on on-premises environment. So we do have great track record in terms of securing the AWS platform and everything that is below the line, as we say, what is the security of the cloud. We have a lot of accreditation and certification that we uphold. We go through fairly regular renewal of those certification, and we have all the details on our website on aws.amazon.com/compliance. And we have a lot of enablement packages, we call, to allow customers to secure their workload that they're building in the cloud too. So as we say, customers are responsible for the applications they're deploying in the cloud, but we do have a lot of best practices and help that we provide customers to make sure that they are able to do so.
This is Lisa. One thing I'll jump in with is referring people to our Amazon or aws.com/compliance page, and that'll give a lot of information about our FedRAMP compliance, CGIS, HIPAA, PCI, all the different compliance requirements that or certifications that we've met. As been mentioned, we've got a number of resource and toolkits to help get you started for specific compliance issues. And things like CGIS, where there's a federal guideline, but then states have their own versions of it. We can help you navigate that as well. We've got a CGIS workbook. We've got a number of other toolkits to address the requirements for that specific security area.
So, and one other specific thing I'd like to add relevant to the question about data security is that we do specifically provide various options to encrypt the data that you deploy as part of your workload within the AWS cloud. So we have ability to encrypt the data at rest, encrypt the data in transit, and we allow different ways to do that depending on what is required by your security posture.
Wonderful. That's going to wrap things up for us here today. We like to get people out of our webinars early because we know everyone's busy. Sarah, Lisa, Atul, do you have anything else to add to end the discussion?
No, I think that we covered a lot of content in this webinar, but if you're looking to get in touch with anybody at Cloud Nexa, our contact information will be available in the slide deck and the recorded webinar, so please feel free to reach out and we'll be happy to engage.
This is Lisa. I just thank everybody for their time.
Okay. Thanks very much, everyone. That's going to conclude today's presentation. Again, we'll be following up with you via email, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day.